He let his mistress raise a glass to the clients his wife had brought him. Evelyn Hartwell arrived at the Langford Hotel at 8:40 p.m., 12 minutes later than the invitation expected and 20 minutes before Grant Hartwell planned to sign the biggest deal of his career. The ballroom was already glowing when the elevator doors opened. Crystal chandeliers, white roses, black tuxedos, satin gowns, champagne moving through the room on silver trays like small, expensive promises. On the far wall, a screen displayed the Bennett Capital logo above the words Strategic Partnership Signing Ceremony. Evelyn stopped just inside the entrance, one hand still holding the clutch that carried her freshly signed separation papers. For a moment, no one noticed her. That was how Grant liked it now. She saw him beneath the largest chandelier, smiling with the effortless confidence of a man who had practiced success until people mistook it for truth. Beside him stood Madison Vale in a red satin evening dress, her hand wrapped around a champagne flute, her shoulder angled toward Charles Bennett and his senior clients, as if she had earned the space there. Grant lifted his glass. Madison lifted hers with him. They were standing exactly where Evelyn used to stand during every major client event, close enough to be photographed, close enough to suggest trust, close enough to rewrite history before the ink was dry. Madison saw Evelyn first. Her smile sharpened, not loudly, not crudely, but with the polished cruelty of a woman who understood that humiliation looked cleaner under chandelier light. "Oh, Evelyn," she said, her voice carrying just far enough for the circle of clients to hear. "I thought tonight was only for people still part of Grant's next chapter." The group went quiet. Charles Bennett did not smile. A younger partner glanced at Grant, waiting to see what kind of man he would be in public. Grant did not correct Madison. He only set his glass down a little too carefully and walked toward Evelyn with the calm irritation of someone whose performance had been interrupted. "Do not make this difficult," he said under his breath. "Bennett is worth $40 million. Evelyn looked past him at the screen, at the logo she had first seen 3 years earlier in an email from her father's former colleague. She remembered the lunch she arranged, the introduction she wrote, the weekend she spent rebuilding Grant's proposal while he slept on the couch with his phone in his hand. She remembered every door she had opened, and every time he walked through it, as if he had found the key himself. Madison laughed softly behind him and touched Charles Bennett's sleeve with professional familiarity she had not earned. Grant glanced back, anxious to return to the room that believed in him. Evelyn did not raise her voice. She did not ask why his mistress was beside his clients. She did not mention the separation papers in her clutch. She simply looked at her husband and asked, "Did you tell them who brought Bennett Capital to you?" Grant's face changed for half a second, and that half second was enough. Then Evelyn's phone lit up in her palm. "Rebecca Sloan, Bennett's counsel is ready. If Charles confirms, the transfer can happen tonight." Grant looked at the message on Evelyn's phone for only a breath, but that breath was enough for her to see the fear behind his polished expression. Not fear of losing her. He had already made peace with that in the quiet, selfish way men do when they believe a woman's love will remain available even after her dignity has been spent. This was different. This was fear of paperwork, of timing, of the wrong person asking the right question before the cameras arrived. He leaned closer, lowering his voice until the music from the string quartet nearly swallowed it. "You do not understand what is at stake tonight," he said. Evelyn almost smiled, because she had spent 12 years understanding what was at stake before Grant ever learned how to pronounce half the words he now used in front of clients. She understood risk when his company had 3 employees, 1 leased printer, and an office above a dentist in Stamford. She understood cash flow when he kept promising investors that the next quarter would change everything. She understood presentation decks at 2 in the morning, when Grant fell asleep with his tie loosened and Evelyn sat at the kitchen island correcting numbers that could have embarrassed him in front of serious people. Bennett Capital had not arrived because Grant was magnetic. It had arrived because Evelyn's father once served on a foundation board with Charles Bennett, and because Evelyn had known exactly how to write the kind of introduction wealthy men respected: brief, precise, impossible to ignore. She had not asked for credit then. In those early years, she believed marriage meant building something with both hands and letting the world see only one signature if that helped the roof go up faster. Grant had been grateful once, or he had performed gratitude well enough for her to believe it. He used to leave coffee beside her laptop and kiss the top of her head when she caught a mistake before a client call. Then the company grew. The office moved to Midtown. The leased printer became a wall of glass conference rooms. Grant's suits got sharper, his introductions got shorter, and Evelyn's name slowly disappeared from the room she had opened. At first, he said it was strategy. Clients prefer one point of contact. Investors like clean leadership. The market responds to confidence. Later, he stopped explaining it all. Now Madison stood beneath the chandelier with Charles Bennett, laughing softly at something she had no history with, while the screen behind her displayed a deal Evelyn had nursed from first email to final structure. Madison knew the names of the clients because Grant had given her briefing cards. Evelyn knew the pauses between their sentences because she had earned them. Grant touched her elbow lightly, not affectionately, but as if guiding her away from a stage entrance. "I need you to stand down," he said. Madison understands the business now. Evelyn looked past him. Madison had tilted her head toward Charles, red satin bright against the pale roses, her champagne glass lifted like a credential. "No, Grant," Evelyn said softly. "She understands the performance." His eyes hardened. This is not the night for resentment. She looked back at him then, calm enough to make him uneasy. "You are right," she said. "Tonight is for ownership." Before he could answer, Charles Bennett turned from Madison and looked directly toward Evelyn, as if he had been waiting to see whether the woman at the edge of the light would finally step into the deal she had begun. Charles Bennett's eyes reached Evelyn before his words did. He was a man in his early 60s, silver-haired, careful, and almost impossible to impress with noise. He had not built Bennett Capital by believing the loudest person in a ballroom. He built it by watching who stayed silent when the truth was inconvenient. Evelyn saw him glance once at Madison, then at Grant, then at the Bennett Capital logo glowing on the wall behind them like a promise someone had already tried to steal. Grant noticed the glance and moved quickly, sliding back into his host's smile before the room could measure the crack. "Charles," he said warmly, "Evelyn just arrived. You remember my wife, of course." The word wife came out smooth, useful, almost decorative. Evelyn felt it land on her shoulder like a borrowed coat. Madison stepped closer to Grant, still holding her champagne flute, her red satin dress bright against the white roses. "Of course," she said. "Evelyn has been so supportive from behind the scenes." It was meant to sound gracious. It was meant to put Evelyn where Grant preferred her, behind, quiet, grateful for whatever space remained after the spotlight had chosen someone else. A few clients smiled politely because people often mistake polished cruelty for social skill when it arrives in a beautiful dress. Evelyn did not correct Madison. Not yet. She looked at the screen again, where the signing ceremony schedule counted down beside the company logos. Hartwell Group, Bennett Capital, Northbridge Holdings listed in smaller print at the bottom as strategic sponsor. Grant had hated that line when Rebecca insisted it stay in the final materials. He called it unnecessary clutter. Evelyn knew it was the one sentence in the room that still told the truth. Grant touched her elbow again and guided her a few feet toward a marble column wrapped in white orchids. To the room, it looked like a husband speaking privately with his wife. To Evelyn, it felt like being moved out of a photograph before it was taken. "I need tonight to look clean," he said. "Bennett does not need to see marital drama." Evelyn looked at Madison, who had already turned back to Charles as if she had inherited the conversation. "Is that why she is standing where your wife used to stand?" she asked. Grant's expression hardened, but his voice stayed low. "Madison is part of the company now. She understands what we are building." "No, Grant," Evelyn said. "She understands the performance." For the first time that night, his mask slipped enough for her to see irritation beneath the panic. "You always do this," he said. "You make everything about what you sacrificed." Evelyn watched the chandelier light move across his cuff links, the one she had given him after his first successful financing round. She remembered him opening the box, promising he would never forget who believed in him before anyone else did. Years later, he had not forgotten. He had simply become comfortable using her belief without naming it. "I am not talking about sacrifice," she said. "I am talking about ownership." Grant gave a quiet laugh, but it had no warmth. "Ownership? This is my company, my clients, my signing ceremony. You chose to step back." Evelyn looked at him then with a stillness that made his smile fade. "I stepped back from being your wife in public," she said. I never stepped away from the paper. Behind them, Madison lifted her glass again, calling lightly for attention as a photographer moved into position near the signing table. She angled herself beside Grant's empty chair, close enough to appear in the official photo if no one stopped her. Charles Bennett did not move toward the table. He kept watching Evelyn. The clock above the ballroom doors read 8:46 p.m. 14 minutes remained before Grant planned to sign a deal that had never fully belonged to him. Evelyn's phone vibrated once in her clutch. She did not need to read it to know Rebecca was already in the building. 3 months earlier, Evelyn had learned the difference between a broken heart and a useful document. The truth had arrived not as a scene, not as a confession, not as lipstick on a collar or perfume in an elevator, but as a calendar invitation sent to the wrong shared account. Madisonville, private dinner, thank you for last night. The subject line had appeared on Evelyn's laptop while she was reviewing a draft referral memo for Bennett Capital, and for several seconds, she simply stared at the screen while the blue light made the kitchen feel colder than it was. Grant was upstairs packing for what he called a client retreat. Evelyn did not call his name. She did not open every message like a woman trying to punish herself with details. She closed the laptop, placed both hands flat on the marble counter, and listened to the house settle around her. There are moments when grief arrives loudly, and there are moments when it becomes a file you create because you finally understand that feelings will not protect what paperwork can. By 9 o'clock the next morning, Evelyn was sitting in Rebecca Sloane's office downtown, wearing a gray wool coat and the same calm expression that made receptionists offer coffee twice. Rebecca had been Evelyn's corporate attorney for years, the kind of woman who read silence as carefully as contracts. She did not ask for gossip. She asked for access, shareholder records, side letters, referral agreements, operating advisory terms, sponsor memorandums, every file connected to Bennett Capital. Evelyn opened her tablet and began sending documents before Rebecca finished speaking. For 2 weeks, they traced the deal backward through names Grant had started calling his own. Bennett Capital had first entered the conversation through Evelyn's family office, not Hartwell Group. The first introduction had come from Evelyn's email. The original sponsor memo had been issued by Northbridge Holdings, the investment vehicle Evelyn controlled separately from her marriage. Hartwell Group had not been the source of the relationship. It had been appointed as operating advisor because Evelyn had trusted Grant to execute what she had built. That was the part that stayed with her the longest. Not the affair, not Madison, the trust, the clean, ordinary, devastating fact that Evelyn had handed Grant a door and watched him repaint it with his own name. Rebecca found the clause on a Thursday evening, buried in a side letter Bennett's counsel had insisted on 3 years earlier. If Hartwell Group materially misrepresented relationship origination, changed key representation standards, or failed to maintain fiduciary confidence with the original sponsor, Bennett Capital could reassign the mandate to Northbridge Holdings with written confirmation. The words were dry, almost dull, but Evelyn felt them like air returning to a room. She had not been erased. She had been archived in the part of the deal Grant had never bothered to read. Now, back inside the Langford Ballroom at 8:47 p.m., Evelyn stood near the orchid-wrapped column and watched Grant return to Madison as if the evening still belonged to him. The photographer adjusted the lights near the signing table. Charles Bennett remained near the edge of the room, quiet and observant. On the large screen, the countdown to the signing ceremony continued, elegant and merciless. 13 minutes. Evelyn opened her clutch and glanced at the separation papers beneath her phone. Then another message arrived from Rebecca Sloane. I am in the lobby. Bennett's counsel has the amendment ready. Evelyn looked up at Grant, at Madison raising her glass again, at the clients gathered beneath the chandelier, and for the first time all night, the pain in her chest felt clean. She was not there to beg for credit. She was there because ownership had finally arrived dressed as proof. At 8:48 p.m., Grant stepped back beneath the chandelier and accepted another round of polite applause as if applause could notarize a lie. Madison stood close beside him, red satin bright against the white roses, her champagne glass held just below her smile. She had learned quickly how to perform belonging. A touch on Grant's sleeve, a laugh at the right client joke, a glance toward the signing table as if the ink waiting there had anything to do with her. Evelyn watched from beside the marble column while Rebecca Sloan entered through the lobby doors with a slim black folder under one arm. Rebecca did not rush. Good lawyers rarely did. She moved through the edge of the room with the calm precision of someone carrying the one document no one wanted mentioned aloud. Evelyn remembered the first time Northbridge Holdings appeared on paper. It had not been glamorous. No gala, no chandeliers, no champagne, just a quiet conference room, a stack of family office records, and her father telling her that independence was not something a woman announced after betrayal. It was something she built before anyone thought to take it from her. Northbridge had begun as a private investment vehicle, designed to hold Evelyn's separate assets, family introductions, and strategic partnerships outside the reach of any marriage, any mood, any man's version of generosity. Grant had always treated it like background paperwork, the kind of thing rich families created to make accountants feel important. He never understood that boring documents are often where real power hides. When Bennett Capital first considered Hartwell Group, Northbridge was the original sponsor. Evelyn had placed the first call. Evelyn had written the first email. Evelyn had vouched for Grant when Charles Bennett asked whether her husband could handle a mandate of that size. Hartwell Group was brought in as operating advisor, not owner of the relationship. Grant had been given the chance to execute. He had mistaken execution for possession. Across the ballroom, the master of ceremonies announced that the signing would begin shortly. A soft ripple of anticipation moved through the guests. Photographers gathered near the table. 2 pens rested on a silver tray beside the printed agreements. Madison leaned toward Charles Bennett and said something that made a few younger associates smile. Then she turned slightly, making sure Evelyn could see her place beside Grant. Evelyn felt the humiliation, but it no longer found anywhere soft to land. It struck the armor of everything Rebecca had already confirmed. The side letter, the sponsor memo, the transfer provision, the fiduciary confidence clause. All of it pointed back to Northbridge. All of it pointed back to her. Rebecca reached Evelyn's side at 8:51 p.m. and opened the black folder just enough for Evelyn to see the top page. Amendment to mandate assignment. Bennett Capital, Northbridge Holdings. Evelyn Hartwell, managing partner. Charles has reviewed the packet, Rebecca said quietly. His counsel is ready if he confirms the origination issue on record. Evelyn looked toward Charles Bennett. He was no longer watching Grant smile. He was watching the space between Grant's performance and Evelyn's silence. Grant saw Rebecca then, and the color beneath his skin changed by half a shade. Madison noticed his distraction and touched his arm, but he barely reacted. For the first time all night, the woman in red was not the problem. She was just the decoration on it. The clock above the ballroom doors turned to 8:52 p.m., 8 minutes before the signing. Evelyn closed the folder gently and handed it back to Rebecca. Grant lifted his glass again, preparing to thank the room for believing in him. Evelyn stood still, her eyes clear beneath the chandelier light. He thought the deal was waiting for his signature. He did not know it was waiting for hers. At 8:53 p.m., the ballroom lights softened by one shade, the hotel's quiet signal that the signing ceremony was about to begin. Guests drifted toward the front of the room with the obedient grace of people who understood wealth had its own choreography. A few clients took their seats in the first row. Photographers adjusted their lenses. The silver tray with the signing pens was placed at the center of the table beneath the Bennett Capital logo, and Grant Hartwell looked at it the way a thirsty man looks at water. Evelyn stood beside Rebecca Sloan near the edge of the ballroom, still enough to be mistaken for calm by anyone who did not know the cost of standing there. Rebecca's black folder rested against her side, closed now, but Evelyn could feel the weight of every page inside it. The amendment, the original sponsor memo, the side letter, the proof that Grant's grand evening had been built on a foundation he never owned. Grant crossed toward them with his champagne glass in hand and Madison following half a step behind him. Her red dress caught the chandelier light each time she moved, but her smile had begun to strain at the corners. She had noticed what all ambitious people eventually notice when paperwork enters a room. Charm suddenly has competition. "Rebecca," Grant said, forcing warmth into his voice. "I did not realize you were attending tonight." Rebecca gave him the smallest professional smile. "I am here for my client." Grant looked at Evelyn. The word client seemed to irritate him more than wife ever had. Evelyn had seen that reaction before. Men like Grant were comfortable with women being emotional, disappointed, even wounded. Those roles kept the story personal. But a woman with counsel, records, and a separate investment vehicle was no longer a domestic inconvenience. She was a counterparty. Madison stepped in gently, still performing elegance. I am sure this can wait until after the ceremony. Everyone is so excited for Grant. Rebecca did not look at her. Evelyn did. For a brief moment, she almost felt sorry for Madison. Not because Madison was innocent, but because she had mistaken proximity for power. She believed standing next to Grant meant standing next to the deal. She did not understand that the deal had never been in his hands alone. At 8:55 p.m., the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone and welcomed everyone to the final signing. A smooth wave of applause moved through the ballroom. Grant turned immediately toward the sound, relieved by public attention, fed by it, restored by it. Madison leaned close and straightened his tie with a soft, possessive gesture meant for the cameras beginning to rise. Evelyn watched the movement without flinching. Years ago, she would have been the one smoothing his lapel before a client meeting, checking for lint, reminding him of names, giving him the last quiet sentence that made him feel ready. Tonight, another woman fixed the surface while Evelyn held the structure. Charles Bennett remained standing near the front row, hands folded, eyes moving from Grant to Rebecca to Evelyn. He did not applaud. That was the first thing Grant missed. Serious men did not always announce doubt. Sometimes they simply withheld their hands. At 8:57 p.m., Rebecca leaned toward Evelyn and said, Bennett's counsel is in the side room. Charles only needs to confirm that Hartwell Group represented itself as the originating party. Evelyn nodded once. Her throat was tight, but her voice stayed level. He will ask. Rebecca studied her for half a second. And if Grant tries to make it personal? Evelyn looked toward the signing table, where Madison had taken the chair nearest Grant's, close enough to frame herself in the photographs. Then I will keep it factual, Evelyn said. The ballroom began to quiet. The master of ceremonies invited Grant to the microphone. Grant walked forward, smiling again, believing the room had returned to him because the lights were on him. Madison lifted her champagne glass, ready to toast. Evelyn looked at the clock above the ballroom doors. 3 minutes remain. Grant reached the microphone at 8:58 p.m., with the signing table behind him and Madison seated where Evelyn's chair had once been. The room softened into silence, the kind that wealthy clients give a man when they are prepared to believe he has earned it. Grant smiled toward Charles Bennett, then toward the cameras, then finally toward the crowd of partners, clients, and employees who had gathered beneath the chandeliers to watch him become larger than his own history. Tonight, he said, is not only about a contract. It is about vision, trust, and the courage to build what others only imagine. A careful wave of applause moved through the ballroom. Madison rose before Grant could continue, lifting her champagne glass with the confidence of someone who had been promised a place in the photograph. If I may, she said, turning her smile toward the room. Grant glanced at her, surprised but pleased enough to let it happen. Madison stepped beside him, red satin bright under the lights, and raised her glass higher. To Grant Hartwell, she said, a man who built all of this from nothing, and who never needed anyone to create his future for him. The sentence crossed the ballroom slowly. It touched every white rose, every silver pen, every program card printed with Hartwell Group's name in heavy black letters. Some guests clapped because they did not know better. Some did not because they did. Evelyn stood beside Rebecca Sloan near the edge of the room, her face still, her hands relaxed around her clutch. The humiliation should have burned hotter. Once it would have. Once, she might have felt the need to step forward, to remind the room of the first email, the first lunch, the first referral, the corrected projections, the nights she worked while Grant slept, the trust she gave him before he learned to sell confidence, as if it were character. But tonight, every memory had already been converted into evidence. Madison looked directly at Evelyn over the rim of her glass. Her expression was almost kind in the way a polished insult tries to disguise itself as grace. Some women help for a season, she added softly, but real leaders know when to move forward. Grant did not stop her. He looked at the clients instead, measuring their reaction, hoping charm could cover what loyalty would not. Evelyn felt the last private thread between them fall quietly to the floor. Charles Bennett did not clap. He looked at Madison for a long second, then at Grant, then at Evelyn. Rebecca opened her black folder. The sound was small, but to Evelyn it felt like a lock turning. Grant reached for his champagne glass and lifted it as though the toast had strengthened him. To partnership, he said. To Bennett Capital, Hartwell Group, and the future we are signing tonight. Madison smiled, satisfied, and the photographers began to move closer to the signing table. Evelyn looked at the clock above the ballroom doors. 8:59 p.m. 1 minute remained. Grant thought Madison had just crowned him in front of his clients. He did not understand that she had done something far more useful. She had said the lie clearly enough for the right man to hear it. Charles Bennett set his untouched glass on the nearest table and stepped away from the front row. The applause thinned before it ended. Grant noticed too late. Charles walked toward the microphone with the calm of a man who never interrupted unless the room needed correction. "Mr. Hartwell," he said, "before we sign anything, I have one question." Charles Bennett did not raise his voice, but the microphone carried his question farther than any toast had carried Madison's smile. "Mr. Hartwell," he said, "before we sign anything, who originated this relationship?" The ballroom held its breath. Grant blinked once, then gave the kind of laugh he used when trying to make a dangerous question sound ordinary. "Hartwell Group did, of course. My team has managed this opportunity from the beginning." Madison nodded beside him, eager to support the answer before she understood the shape of the trap. "Grant has been leading this for years," she said, still smiling toward the clients. Charles did not look at her. He looked at Grant with the patient disappointment of a man watching someone step into a hole he had been warned not to dig. "That is not what my records show," Charles said. The sentence cooled the entire room. Grant's smile weakened, but he held it in place. "There may be some confusion in early correspondence. Evelyn was involved socially at the beginning as my wife, but the commercial relationship has always been mine." Evelyn felt the word socially pass through the ballroom like a small, polished insult. 12 years of work reduced to a dinner napkin. A family introduction turned into a wife standing beside a man. A mandate built on her credibility dressed up as his personal charm. She did not move. Rebecca Sloan stepped forward from the edge of the room, black folder open in both hands. "There is no confusion," Rebecca said. Bennett Capital was introduced through Evelyn Hartwell's family office. The original sponsor of record is Northbridge Holdings, controlled by Evelyn Hartwell. Hartwell Group was appointed as operating advisor under a conditional mandate. Grant turned toward Rebecca, the color leaving his face one careful shade at a time. "Rebecca, this is not the place." Charles answered before she could. "It is exactly the place, since this is where I was asked to sign." Rebecca placed the first document on the signing table, not dramatically, simply precisely. Original sponsor memo. Then the second, side letter. Then the third, transfer amendment. The photographers lowered their cameras. The clients in the first row leaned forward without meaning to. Madison's champagne glass remained lifted near her chest, but the gesture no longer looked elegant. It looked forgotten. Charles picked up the sponsor memo, read the first page, and turned it so Grant could see the line that mattered. Northbridge Holdings, represented by Evelyn Hartwell. His voice stayed calm. Did Hartwell Group represent itself tonight as the originating party? Grant opened his mouth, then closed it when he realized every speech, every program card, every toast Madison had just given had answered for him. Evelyn finally stepped toward the table. The chandeliers reflected softly along the edge of the silver pens. She looked at Charles, not Grant. "My office originated the relationship," she said. "Hartwell Group was given advisory authority because I trusted my husband to execute the mandate ethically. That trust no longer exists." A murmur moved through the ballroom and disappeared just as quickly. Charles nodded once to someone near the side doors. Bennett's counsel entered with a second folder already prepared. Grant reached for control, but there was nothing solid left to hold. "Charles," he said, "we can revise the language after signing." Charles looked at him as if the answer had become painfully simple. "I do not sign deals built on revised truth." Rebecca slid the amendment across the table. "Under the side letter," she said, "Bennett Capital may transfer the mandate to the original sponsor upon written confirmation." Charles removed the signing pen from the silver tray. Madison lowered her glass. Grant stared at Evelyn as if she had appeared from behind a curtain he had designed himself. But she had not appeared. She had always been there, on the first email, in the first memo, under the line he never bothered to read. Charles signed the confirmation. Then he turned the document toward Evelyn. Evelyn looked at the document Charles Bennett turned toward her and felt the ballroom narrow to one sheet of paper, one silver pen, and 12 years of being treated like the quiet margin of a story she had written. The amendment lay beneath the chandelier light with Northbridge Holdings printed clearly at the top, no longer small, no longer hidden at the bottom of someone else's program. Rebecca Sloane stood beside her, steady and silent. Charles waited with his hands folded. Grant stared at the page as if the ink itself had betrayed him. Evelyn picked up the pen. For a second, she remembered the woman she had been at the beginning, sitting at a kitchen island at 2 in the morning, fixing projections while Grant slept, believing love meant making his success easier to carry. She remembered every email signed with his name after her work made it stronger, every meeting where she sat one chair too far from the center, every client who shook Grant's hand because Evelyn had opened the door first. Then she signed. Evelyn Hartwell, Managing Partner, Northbridge Holdings. The room did not erupt. It simply understood. The deal had not been stolen from Grant. It had returned to the person whose name had been waiting inside the paperwork all along. Charles signed the final acknowledgement and handed the folder to Rebecca. Bennett Capital will proceed with Northbridge Holdings, he said. Hartwell Group's advisory role is terminated under the existing side letter. The words fell cleanly, professionally, without drama, which made them impossible to fight. Madison lowered herself slowly into the chair beside the signing table, the champagne still untouched in her hand. Only minutes earlier, she had stood in the center of the room as if proximity to Grant made her part of the future. Now no one was looking at her. The cameras were down. The clients had turned toward Evelyn. The photograph Madison had dressed for would never exist. Grant stepped toward Evelyn, his face pale beneath the warm lights. Evelyn, we can fix this. We can restructure. We can keep this between us. She looked at him with a calm that made his words sound very far away. Between us? She asked softly. You put your mistress beside my clients, let her toast over my work, and called my history your company. Grant swallowed. That was not what I meant. It was exactly what you meant, Evelyn said. You wanted applause. I wanted ownership. He had no answer because there was no version of the truth left that could still make him look like the victim. Rebecca closed the folder. Charles Bennett gave Evelyn one respectful nod, the kind men like him reserved for people who did not need to oversell their value. Around the ballroom, the white roses, silver trays, and untouched champagne seemed to belong to another evening. One Grant had planned, and Evelyn had ended without raising her voice. She placed the pen back on the tray, then removed the separation papers from her clutch and set them beside the signed amendment for Grant to see. The two documents looked simple together. One ended the performance, the other corrected the ownership. Madison finally stood, but there was nowhere for her to stand that mattered. Grant said Evelyn's name once more, quieter this time, almost like a request. She did not turn it into a conversation. She walked past the signing table, past the cameras, past the clients who now knew exactly who had brought Bennett Capital into the room. At the ballroom doors, she paused only long enough to look back at the screen. Hartwell Group had already gone dark. Northbridge Holdings remained. Evelyn stepped into the hotel corridor with Rebecca beside her, leaving Grant beneath the chandelier he had mistaken for sunlight. She did not steal the deal. She simply stopped letting him sign her name without ink.